Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and the sermon for the previous Sunday. And this video is looking at the scriptures and sermon from Sunday, June 25th. The scriptures for the day were Genesis 21, verses 8 through 21, Psalm 86, verses 1 through 10, and 16 through 17, Romans chapter 6, verse 1b through 11, and Matthew chapter 10, verses 24 through 39. Once again, I preached on the Genesis text for this week. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Matthew passage, the gospel passage in this video. And Jesus started the passage we had last week. Jesus was sending his disciples out to be apostles. The word apostle means good news. Someone who proclaims the good news is sent to give good news to somebody. And so Jesus' disciples become apostles, and they're sent out. But in the midst of sending them out and giving them instructions, Jesus also warns them that the road isn't going to be easy, and they're going to meet some people. They're going to run into some resistance. And the passage continues this week with that same warning about the possibility that Jesus' good news is going to actually cause some resistance and some tension and some even division in families. Jesus starts by saying, a disciple is not above the teacher and a slave not above the master. So if people call the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? Jesus is basically saying if he's getting criticism for his teachings and his actions, they should expect this similar kind of treatment. This is important for them to realize because at first thought you would think that good news would be received with joy and with thanksgiving and happily, and why would there be resistance and why would it cause disruption to receive good news? So it's really important to understand that Jesus' good news could possibly cause problems. And in this passage, there's actually a place where Jesus says, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And it almost sounds as though it sounds almost like the opposite of what Jesus came to do. We thought that Jesus was coming to bring peace when humanity was so used to picking up weapons against each other. And there is a part of that that is true. But the other part that's true is that humanity puts in place certain ways of living, certain structures, certain hierarchies, just certain understandings of the way life is. And in those understandings, there is generally a place where certain human beings fall within a hierarchy of basically value. And we talked about a little bit of that, actually. I talked about that through the Genesis reading, the story of Hagar, and that Hagar was seen by Abraham and Sarah as somebody that they could just cast out and forget about, because she was interfering. Well, she wasn't really interfering. Sarah was just concerned and a little bit letting her imagination get the best of her, and was jealous that there was this other child when her son Isaac is supposed to be the one who inherits God's promise. And she was afraid that they would be either competing for the promise or that Ishmael might get part of the promise that would belong to Isaac. And so she wanted Hagar gone. And there's a sense in which humanity in general has always seen some people as people who can be cast out and forgotten about, for various reasons. But those reasons aren't always the same. But it happens in every culture, it seems, where somebody almost has to always cast somebody else in a bad light so that they can be seen as superior or as more worthy, or just so they can mistreat somebody or forget about somebody. And this has happened throughout history. So we talk about this a lot of times in Jesus' day. Sometimes the poor and the sick, those who were disabled, these were people who could be cast out and not regarded, to the point where even the faith community, even religious leaders had gotten to the point where they put a theological spin on that to say, well, these people are actually being punished by God. God doesn't care about these people, and so don't bother with them, because if God's going to punish them, just stay out of God's way. So Jesus comes along, and what's Jesus' message? What is Jesus doing? Jesus spends a lot of time with these people who have been cast out, and says that God does regard them with favor and with value, and we can't forget about them. You can't just cast people aside. There is no person that God would cast aside. And we saw that then in the Genesis passage. God came to Hagar, and God saw Hagar's pain, and God heard the cries of her son, and God blessed them. And so there is nobody who is outside of God's favor, who is outside of God's blessing. Now, when you hear that, but you have been part of propping up this system of some people being worthy and some people being not worthy, that gets in the way. That's when you get mad. Even if it's the truth. I mean, obviously, if, Jesus is the Word became flesh. That's that's John's gospel. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. That's Matthew's gospel. God with us to show us the things about God that are true. And some human beings in that day and in our day and in days in between, they don't want to hear that God regards everybody and cares about everybody and places value on everybody. And that's when you get the division, and that's when you get the people trying to basically discount the message by labeling the apostle, the message bringer, as of the devil or Beelzebul or whatever. So this is Jesus' warning, not just to his disciples in those days, but to us as well. That sometimes just because there is just because that causes some issues doesn't mean that the good news shouldn't still be proclaimed. In fact, proclaiming the good news and sticking to that proclamation and that truth will bring about some turmoil and some issues at some point. But, it's important for us to remember what peace truly is. Peace just isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is that everybody is in right relationship. And if there's a situation in which nobody's rocking the boat, but people are still being mistreated and devalued and cast out, that's not true peace. True peace is peace for everybody, not just peace for some. And so Jesus is warning his disciples and warning us too, that sometimes the good news regardless of the fact that it is good news, isn't always going to fall upon people as receiving good news. But that's okay, because it's a reminder that this isn't God punishing you, punishing the message givers. This is, God loves us. We're more valuable to God than many sparrows, as it says. But sometimes the good news, the truth of who God is, that there's no person who should be cast out, who should be cast away. There is no person who is not of value. That is just going to ruffle some feathers sometimes. No pun intended. And so this is just Jesus warning about that, but that also shouldn't stop us from sharing that good news that the world needs to hear, because at the same time there are going to be people who want and need to hear that good news, and you will see the joy and the transformation of that good news has on the lives of people for whom this is truly life-giving, life-saving news. So that's a little bit about the Matthew passage for this week. Feel free to share some comments about the video, about the scriptures, about the sermon, either on YouTube or on Facebook. And I thank you very much for watching. God bless.